To be involved, we can move to the second round and to ask what the NGOs can do and what are they doing right now to tackle this challenge. And maybe I would like to start with Mr. VANGELI for now, and since his role is a bit different from other panelists here, so I would like to ask him to elaborate on the issue of relations between between NGOs and state in that respect.
Thank you. State's role in the information war is based basically on responsibility and obligation. These are the principles how the states that define the approach of the state. Compared to that, I feel that the NGO's role is mostly defined by freedom and interest. If I will list a little bit several examples, independence. For NGOs, that's a trait that defines and influences how they work, pluses, minuses, compared to the state that is always dependent of the whole government, on the constitution, of the rules, finances, etc. And I'm not judging it, I'm describing it in a very neutral way, because in different situations and for different purposes it can serve a very good or very bad place. NGOs have a very wide freedom in basically choosing what they will do and how. That's completely different from the state, where the whole government is structured, divided into competencies, sometimes or most of the times, either generally or very specifically defined as a competency based on a law, and everybody is doing what they're, or should be doing what they're supposed to be doing. They cannot switch their competencies as they like, they cannot shift when the situation changes that fast. That's a difference from the NGOs that have the flexibility and speed that they can use. Third thing, the work of NGOs basically based on freedom of speech, of using the freedom of speech and freedom of association, while for the state it's more obligation to communicate, not freedom, but rather obligation. That's in the good case, when the state is doing something, so the obligation. NGOs have many times the possibility to hide the motives and the goals of what they're doing. The state usually, with some exceptions, very openly, right in the law, states what is the goal, how they will do it, what they're doing, how many people, where they're staying, etc. There's a lower, there's lower, I would say, lower level of responsibility on the NGO side. Usually they are responsible to themselves, to the society, maybe to a donor, maybe generally morally responsible. That's very different. The state is responsible to their superiors, to the laws, and there are mechanisms, checks and controls, which you will usually don't find at the NGO side. And that's also the reason why, and we have mentioned it many times, even the foreign actor are using the channel of the NGOs, because sometimes it's much easier to act and work as an NGO than to work as a state agency. But that works also for us as a democratic government. I will come to that later. Also, the NGOs play many different roles in different situations. There's no problem, there's no rule for a think tank to act as a media, basically, today, at the same time as a think tank, as somebody who's influencing policy, and as a watchdog at the same time. The state will not do that. Roles are divided. And, of course, if you are an NGO, there's always this, I would say, ethos or basically a picture of somebody who comes and fights for the civic society. This kind of moral authority the state will probably never have. We will have different kind of authority, maybe more based on law, real power in a physical type meaning, but we will not have this authority, the informal authority. And now about the space between us.
Some summarizing of the relation between the state and NGOs, and maybe Adam, if I may ask you to go to give us the experience, what is done in that field, in this field in Poland, what are the cases from which we can learn, and what are the mistakes which we should avoid.
In terms of information warfare, this is quite in terms of NGOs working with the information warfare issues, is that there are like only 4 of them who have experts on people who can be named as experts. A lot of people work for the state, and there is one of those 4 institutions in Poland is a state think tank. So this is like the biggest problem, that there is so few people who have the experience of working with information on the one hand, and on the other of, for example, the biggest threat in Poland, it's not internal actors but external actors. So when people work with information warfare but they were never to Russia, they don't know the Russian environment, political environment, how can they interpret some of the actions of the Kremlin accordingly, and how can they show the right way to do it, to do something with this, or how can they educate the society. This is the one of the biggest problems, that there are a limited number of experts in the field, and there is no model of preparing new ones, because the state is gathering,
kind of highlighting those like very rather theoretical ideas about the states and about who is the expert that are really materializing in the Polish situation. So thank you for this kind of illustration. And now, Lóránt, please, if you could give us your hint on that.
Yes, in Hungary, the NGOs are mostly on the defensive. So to give you a more general framework, so Eurobarometer polls show, so the last poll in 2017 autumn, that the Europeans and Hungarians' threat perception is still centered around migration and terrorism, and the economic aspects are the third as subjects of concerns, despite that the overwhelming majority of Europeans or Hungarian citizens think that their economic situation will be better in the next 12 months. So this means that the young democracies like Hungary, where governments try to build on social anxieties or economic hardships or nationalist xenophobia, they really try to reach out to these attitudes by creating specific domestic and foreign enemies. And this is what happened in Hungary. So, so after Prime Minister Orbán started building his illiberal regime after 2010, he tried to seize the moment of the migration crisis in 2015. And first we had like around 250,000 of refugees or migrants passing through Hungary until the southern border was open and the border fence wasn't established with the Hungarian-Serbian border. But after that, we hardly had any refugees who stayed in Hungary or who we accepted on a governmental level. So the Hungarian government started to build up this enemy of the state type phenomenon and disinformation based on Muslim migrants destroying the European civilization, Hungary being a fortress like Russia in defending European Christianity, and so forth and so forth. And by doing so, they needed domestic enemies. And the Hungarian NGOs got cast as these enemies, because some of them, of course, we have NGOs who are focusing on refugees, who are working with refugees, so for the last 2 decades. And since then, the Hungarian National Assembly adopted 2 bills. One is the bill against foreign-funded organizations, which the preamble of the bill specifically says that we need this bill, we need to stigmatize foreign-funded NGOs because they might have to do something with terrorism, with foreign interests. And then we go back to the original source, which was this crisis of migration, and the government orchestrated narrative that this migration represents a years-long fight and basically an eternal threat for the European or Hungarian identity, the national security of Hungarians, national cultures, and so on. So they needed to tie this narrative to actual actors. And because foreign-funded NGO seems already suspicious to a certain extent, if you can successfully label them and put them on a list, they started to push out conspiracy theories about George Soros, how he is putting forth his agenda, which was originally also a Kremlin conspiracy theory, and they started to say that these Hungarian NGOs, they tried to open the floodgates of migration, they tried to aid illegal migrants, they pose a national security threat. And now we are at the second round of bills, which were introduced this February 2018. It has a very catchy name, Stop George Soros. It's a package of three bills, specifically aimed against NGOs involved with refugees. They also establish a perimeter, so a line of defense along the southern border, from which they can, they can prohibit people, activists, or anybody to enter this line of the Hungarian border. So it's like the Iron Curtain, really. But most importantly, it shows that they kept alive the narrative through building a conspiracy theory, by stigmatizing NGOs, and by following the footsteps of President Putin, because this serves no other purpose than to present Hungary as being in mortal danger. And we had the very ridiculous and also frightening instances of spontaneous anti-migration actions happening in the Hungarian rural countryside. The latest one involved a Hungarian girl who was at a hair salon, and she came out wearing a scarf because she had, her hair was washed, and she was reported to the police as some possible migrant suspect. We had Saudi Arabian policemen training in Hungary in a local smaller town, but they were spotted by Hungarian locals, and they will report it to the police that, look guys, we have a problem here. The migrants are taking over our town, and the police went and they checked out these South European police vans. So we see a moral panic has been built up to the point.
Some recommendation.
No, it's worse than we expected. So.
Yeah. Okay, so Mário, if you could elaborate on Slovak good examples.
All right. Let me say what the actors are doing with no particular order. There's a website, Conspiratori.sk, which is a list of conspiracy websites, and the list serves as a basis for the bullshit detector, which is a Chrome plugin that detects, if you install it, detects suspicious content, and it sort of links there. The real sort of added value of this list, which is constantly overseen and evaluated and updated by a team of people from different backgrounds, so it is legitimate, is to discourage companies, private companies, to invest into conspiracy websites. Basically, just flagging that this is incredible content. That's a bad word. Facebook humor is working very well. You have GYomRI, you have Prečo ľuďom hrabe, why people are so stupid. You know, all these sort of Facebook groups administered together, you know, churning out content that is ridiculing just the extremists and the fascists and the anti-system players. You have research, obviously. You have the vulnerability index, for example, produced by Globsec, which ranks the V4 countries by vulnerability to hostile Russian influence, in which Hungary comes out with an alarming numbers, and Slovakia only comes second. So this is like resilience across different factors. You have polling and focus groups that is helping tailor communication strategy. You have a website called counterdisinfo.org. It gives the online activist a set of tools, DIY sort of activism tool. The Slovak Security Policy Institute, for example, organizes summer schools for both teachers and students against extremism. That's worked well. Also a tour, speaking tours by several different organizations, not only the SSPI, but also the Slovak Foreign Policy Association and others who tour Slovakia, sort of, you know, speaking to the students, addressing them. My own Forum of the World's Religions, which is an interfaith, a faith-based organization, an NGO. We have a program in which we take a rabbi, a priest, and an imam to Slovak high schools in order to debunk the myths and promote tolerance and respect. You have websites like Anti-Propaganda.sk, which is chasing Putin's tail, basically increasing awareness about the tactics and the methods of Russian or pro-Russian propaganda. You have, again, my own project, and that's the dark path, the light path, the path of light, so to speak. We're less concerned about, you know, what Putin's doing. We're more concerned about how to promote a positive view of democracy, its potential, positive view of patriotism rather than the ethnocentric nationalism, and other things. We're speaking to the youth in particular. Deník N, a major Slovak newspaper, has produced 2 instruction books on critical thinking, one, and on propaganda, how it manifests itself. It's for teachers and students, freely downloadable, crowdfunded, very surprisingly so. You know, it went through the roof. People invested in actually printing more of these manuals in order to spread them into as many schools as possible. So, you know, all in all, these NGO actors have done a lot and cooperated a lot, remarkably well in doing so. Finally, the government is catching up. We have a security strategy that explicitly talks about hostile propaganda in Russia. We have a concept, a draft concept on hybrid threats out, not yet approved by the government. And we have a small but promising Ministry of Foreign Affairs institution, the Stratcom department. So the institutions, the policy and the action are finally catching up. The action meaning the We Are NATO, we're part of a We Are NATO campaign, 8 pilot nations promoting NATO. And the government has also has a We Are the EU campaign, and it's partnered with NGOs there, with us and others in doing that very wisely so. We are slow by definition because democracies are slow by definition, very decentralized. We don't produce trolling factories like the other side does. What is not yet there? The NGOs are still, they have great...
Broader ideas.
How much time do you have?
Like, take 5 minutes, please.
Okay, because I have 5 topics to do.
That's
Each 5, yeah, okay.
Okay, I will
Well,
signal
just,
that.
NGOs, in this context, we have to mention Havel and the informal sector and the role of civil society in defining the most vital part of democracy, as opposed to the formal part of democracy defined by elections or political society, as some people would say. You know, NGOs are hugely disadvantaged now because they're under attack from much more organized and powerful actors. So what they can do in many circumstances is relatively limited, but what they can still do is do what governments aren't doing properly, which, again, riff on something that was just said, is to inform citizens how their countries benefit from EU membership. The Czech government is a really good example of a government that doesn't spend much time talking to its citizens about why being in the EU is a good thing. And statistics show that about 25 to 30% of Czechs are pro-EU. And it's mostly this kind of gray category in the middle that thinks, you know, I don't know enough about the EU, how could I be against it? And then you have the other side of the bell curve where they're vehemently against it. The EU is critical to the prosperity and daily lives of people who are members of EU states. And, you know, Britain is the test case. Britain wasn't a fully integrated member in many ways, as the Czech Republic is because of currency. But just wait, you know, if we could meet again in 5 years and do a diachronic analysis of life in Britain after the EU, I think there'd be something to that. Anyway, do a better job doing that. Critically, NGOs need to mobilize people. When I say mobilize people, I am actually talking about getting them together to demonstrate and to be heard. This is the secret weapon of democracy, is getting people out on the streets who vote, who then get covered by the media, who then get people to think something must be wrong. This is what just happened in Washington recently, and it's what happened here 2 nights ago. The more people are out there protesting, the more tyrants fear getting thrown out of power where you actually do have elections, and they can get thrown out of power. I can't overestimate how important it is that politicians fear people who vote, and one of the reasons why the Republican Party in America right now under Trump's leadership does so well is voter suppression. They want to suppress activity. They want to, during elections, they want to minimize the number of people who vote, who tend to be progressive voters, who are mobilized. The other thing that NGOs can do is media literacy. Media literacy is one of the most important things that will counter information warfare in the future. People have to be smarter about deciding what's true and what's false. Again, sounds trite, but it's actually really important. And this means, you know, becoming a lobby that influences educational curricula in public schools. So debunking stories versus media literacy is a little bit like the war on drugs. You've got the supply side war where you go out and you take out drug dealers and you burn down marijuana farms and you show this stuff in public and you get guys with machine guns saying, look at this. Okay, that's a quick fix. But the way you win the so-called war on drugs is the equivalent, the way you win the so-called information war is media literacy, which is the same as decreasing demand for drugs. Attacking the demand side isn't going to happen quickly. Attacking the media literacy side is not going to happen quickly. It's a long-term strategy. And it takes deliberate focus on the part of people who are elected officials. Threats or internal threats. So it's very easy if you look at countries like the Czech Republic or Poland or even Israel and the US, that certain countries are their own worst enemies because of how easy it is to manipulate people and to cause reactions to phenomena. How susceptible are people, meaning the population in general, to divisive, invidious narratives, right? If you go to Scandinavia, there is a significant proportion of the population that's Muslim, that immigrated, first generation, second generation. There are troubles integrating people. No one's going to deny that. But there is not a mass movement, and there isn't. Islamophobia doesn't define the political debate, the parameters of debate in the media or privately in Scandinavia. Something's gone wrong in the Czech Republic that went right in this other setting, where people aren't so easily influenced by these negative debates. Now, what is it? Is it civic literacy? Is it being small and in the middle of a continent and creating problems? And you know, Americans definitely fall into this category right now, unfortunately. You know, again, I don't want to hold up Scandinavia as the way the rest of the world should be, but there is something in the mass civic psychology of the country that's resistant to neo-fascist, frankly, messaging that's based on hate in countries where you can just knock people down like bowling pins with that kind of messaging. Something creates that. You know, again, I would say, oh, maybe it's religion, because people who grow up religious are credulous. They believe they're lied to from the time they're children, and they believe everything, and they love stories. Well, the Czech Republic has more atheists as a proportion of the population than anywhere in the world. There goes that argument. I think it's important in some contexts, including the American one, but that's obviously not a universal explanation for what we're talking about. So, again, you know, it's not always the external threat. External threats that are phony are actually internal threats when they become the source of the crisis. Look closely at cause and effect. Don't just look at the effects and what you think is happening. Do some thinking about what's causing what.
Thank you. I think that we did some thinking all over the panel right now for almost an hour and a half. I will just give a floor to Lóránt just for a few remarks, I assume, about the Hungary. So please sum up some very interesting points from this debate, so we can see that very important. There is a comparison, but not only cooperation between the NGOs as such, but also with the other actors, with the state, with the media, with activists, with teachers. Then we can say that it's important to use not only, let's say, the dark side of the force, such as debunking and chasing Putin's agents all over our countries, but also to go out from our social bubble and to spread, let's say, those positive narratives. And in the end, I think it's very important point not to expect that the results will be delivered quickly, but to be patient about it. So, and now we have something like 20-25 minutes, so I will open the floor